We've all heard these things before, not too long ago actually. Everyone was questioning what on earth happened to the center position of the NBA. Back in 2012, you had Dwight Howard, you had Andrew Bynum. Those two were the most dominant centers in the league and were more or less traditional centers. After those two, you had a mix of guys like Marc Gasol, who was always a great player but hasn't put up the dominant numbers you'd expect from a former All-Star. You also had guys like Roy Hibbert, who became a two-time All-Star with averages of like 12 points and 8 rebounds. As you all know, he fell out of the NBA very quickly after he left Indiana. Then there was a bunch of other players back then like Al Horford, Andrew Bogut, Joakim Noah. They were all solid centers, but none of them could carry an offense, and none of them were ever the primary scoring options on their respective teams. It was around these years, from like 2010 to 2015-ish, where it looked like the center position was dead. The times of throwing the ball to your big man down low and watching him put in work, it was rarely ever seen anymore. However, nowadays, it looks like the centers have come back. Among younger players, it's arguably the strongest position with the brightest future out of all the positions. How's it going, folks? My name's Andy, and today I'm going to talk about the revival of the NBA center. And why did they go from being nearly extinct to some of the best, most important players at their respective positions? First, we gotta understand how we got here. And in order to do that, I'm going to give you guys some quotes from some NBA legends and why they believe the centers were dying off. All these quotes were from the early part of the 2010 decade. Jerry West said, quote, "Who do kids emulate? They don't emulate big players, they emulate smaller people who can dribble the ball through a damn Coke bottle. Those are the things that excite kids. Everyone wants to be like Michael Jordan," said Patrick Ewing. Chris Ballard of Sports Illustrated believes that, quote, "There has been a decline in relatable centers in the last decade, with skills that can be duplicated by their fans." He said there is no modern-day sky hook, Abdul-Jabbar's signature shots, which is still commonly seen on pickup courts by people of all sizes. This has resulted in fewer emerging players striving to mirror careers of the past generation's low-post tacticians. Additionally, there have been a couple of rule changes over the last few decades that allowed perimeter players to flourish, but big men to falter. One of those was zone defense being made legal in the early 2000s, making it harder for big men to post up and score. Another was the removal of hand checking in 2004, which gave wing players and guards a much bigger advantage than ever before. Hence why, as the years progressed, we saw an explosion of new talent on the perimeter. So that's how we got to the point where centers slowly became marginalized. In 2013, the NBA League office issued an unprecedented decision. They decided to remove the center position completely off the ballot, changing it to just frontcourt and backcourt. This was basically them saying that, well, the centers in our league currently suck, so we'll just combine them with forwards. But it was also a sign that the NBA landscape was changing. As I mentioned earlier, it became a perimeter-dominated game. However, fast forward to now, 2020. The center position has been revived. Over the past few years, the revival has started and we've seen more and more dominant centers rise up in this league. Among these guys, we have Joel Embiid, Nikola Jokic, Karl Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert, Kristaps Porzingis, and others like Nikola Vucevic, who recently had an all-star season, and Andre Drummond is still playing well. And then there's up-and-coming guys like Domantas Sabonis, who should be an all-star soon, and even guys like Jaren Jackson and DeAndre Ayton look like future stars. There's a ton of centers who are either current cornerstones of their franchise or future cornerstones. The position is back. It's the strongest era of centers since the 1990s. But why now? I mean, even just 10 years ago, it looked like centers have become nearly extinct. What caused this revival? The answer to that is, well, as the game changed, the NBA centers have adapted. Back in the days, when you think of a superstar center, you think of guys like Hakeem Olajuwon, Patrick Ewing, David Robinson, Shaq. While many of them played like traditional post-up back-em-down in the paint centers, in fact, they were so versatile. They could defend, they could pass, they knew how to handle double teams, and they were just all incredibly skilled. It's difficult to compare them to these new centers of today, but what is similar is that they are also incredibly skilled, and their skill sets have evolved and adapted to the modern NBA game. That's what these guys have done. Many of them can play like traditional bigs in the post, but they're also super versatile, especially when it comes to shooting, a skill that was not common for centers back in the day. But now it's essential, and many of these current stars could shoot fairly well. But perhaps another aspect that we haven't talked about is the NBA has become a true global game. If you noticed, many of the players I mentioned earlier are not from the United States. Some are from Europe, some from Africa, where the game is taught differently. And some would say that players from overseas develop certain skills that centers in America do not develop. That's why it's common to see that big men from overseas are typically more skilled compared to the average big men from America. Additionally, the role of the center has changed as well. You don't need to be scoring 25 or 30 points a game to have a major impact. Now that the game has seen an influx of perimeter talent, that means that big men are more important than ever. Because no matter what position you play, if you want to drive to the rim, you need to go through the big man. This has created a new era of big men who are quick on their feet and can defend the pick and roll. Guys that come to mind are Steven Adams, Clint Capella, Miles Turner, Rudy Gobert, and even Al Horford, who's getting older but he's still going strong. While these guys won't be putting up 25 a night, they're incredibly important to their team's defense. Billy Donovan, the Thunder head coach, has talked about how important Steven Adams is, even if he doesn't have a single play ran for him. He states, quote, "The one thing that enables Steven to be so effective is his overall athletic ability, and his quickness and his foot speed for a guy his size. At times, we'll have him switch onto guards, and we feel pretty good about that. He runs the floor and gets offensive rebounds. I think his feet, as good as his feet are, will allow him to play in a game that has gotten a lot smaller." This applies to many other centers in the current NBA. In a league dominated by smaller players, it's arguable that the most important defender you can have is a strong center who can move his feet. On top of all this, another thing I gotta point out is the blurred line between the power forward and the center positions. Nowadays, so many teams go small and put traditional power forwards at the 5. Many players who would normally be power forwards are now playing center for long stretches of time. So while guys like LaMarcus Aldridge, Anthony Davis, and Draymond Green are all considered power forwards, they've spent a lot of time over the last few years playing center in small ball lineups. Green especially, he made a huge impact for undersized big men. He inspired a lot of young players who might not be tall enough to play the traditional 5, but after seeing how Green is so well-rounded defensively and offensively, now we see more undersized big men who want to play like him come into the league. They saw how good he was and how he was the perfect fit for the Golden State Warriors. Giannis deserves a mention as well because he legitimately plays like a center, but sometimes he's also the main ball handler. The position has evolved so much to the point where the term center cannot be associated with any specific playstyle. While there have been past legends like Shaq and Chuck who voiced their displeasures about big men not dominating enough, that's more of an old school mentality. While some bigs do dominate like they want to see, many of them have a tremendous impact on the game without playing like it's the 1990s. Funny enough, the rule changes throughout the 2000s that benefited the perimeter players have caused the centers to adapt and become even better themselves. As a result of all of this, the center position has been revived. Through a combination of evolving skill sets and adapting to the new NBA landscape, we're now in a golden age of NBA big men. And it's exciting to see the position as strong as ever. Instead of having one-dimensional post-up players like Al Jefferson or Enes Kanter, in order to succeed as a center, you need to do a lot more. Whether it's being able to shoot threes or passing through the high post or defending the pick and roll, all of this adds so much more depth and so much more value than being a traditional center. Anyway, that's all folks. That sums up how NBA center saw a massive revival in the last few years. It's a great comeback story for a position that we thought would be completely dead, but instead it evolved alongside the rest of the game. Thank you everyone so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, I'll see you next time.